Once more, welcome and greetings to our viewers via Zoom. Welcome to the second installment of our CDO seminar series presented by Leap Beyond in partnership with Nordic AI. In this series, we'll be choosing from a list of burning topics about data in 2020 and the pivotal role data currently plays in society. Today, we turn our minds to data in highly regulated sectors. Each seminar will invite a new panel of 4 C-level experts from startups and established global entities to ask and answer the tough questions. We have some questions to get things started. However, this is also interactive. If you're joining from Zoom, you'll notice the Q&A tab where you can ask and vote on questions for our panel today. Please do use it. Throw in your questions early to make sure we have time to get to them. Our fearless backstage team here will also be helping out in the chat, where we also invite you to discuss the topics with each other and the panel. In the chat, please make sure you set yourself to all panel and attendees when you're talking. That way, absolutely everyone can see what you're doing. My name is Rob. I'll be the moderator for today. Today's topic, data in highly regulated sectors. Banking, insurance, pharma, tax. Algorithms heavily drive how we interact with each other and determine the services and products we're advertised or receive. Algorithms of bad actors are committing fraud and sending spam, while algorithms of cybersecurity fight against them. Our banks and insurers hold a wealth of personal data and information about us. How are those data being used, and is it in our best interests? In particular, also, what approaches and techniques from these highly regulated sectors should carry over into the world of healthcare? So a warm welcome with thanks to our panelists. As per usual, I'm joined by 4 panelists that you see around me. I'll just very quickly do the name drops. Please wave when you hear me mention you. Representing the public sector, taxation, banking, and fighting fraud, Nadeem Gulzar from the Danish Ministry of Taxation.
Hey.
Representing banking, people and change, and innovation in banking, Kees Klein from ING Bank. With a history across multiple fintech startups and highly regulated industries across Europe and Africa, now working with AXA and ING on a new bank insurance initiative, we welcome Pieter Viljoen. And finally, Martin Stockdale, a partner at Kennedy's Law, responsible for their anti-fraud initiatives and with a history across fintech and insurance. Welcome one and all. So, straight into the questions. First, easy question. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with highly regulated data, starting with Martin.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much, Rob. I approach this from two sectors, really. There is obviously the legal sector, through which I personally am regulated, and our commercial operation is a legal business. I also act in the insurance sector as well, because those are our clients. So we are looking at data from the perspective of us and how we can make ourselves better, more informed, make our services better. And we're looking at data from our clients. What is the data expectations of our clients? How can we help our clients be better at using their data, both in terms of the problems that they have? And typically we are focused in the claims environment, because that's where our clients traditionally have needed us as a law firm. So we're less involved in that pricing conversation and that sales channel. We're more involved in that there is a claim. How does the data get used in that claim process? And from our perspective then, we are then driving insight into both our business and into our clients' business. And we're helping our clients by developing products that they can use to enable them to be better, smarter, faster, etc. All the things that we like to do when talking about data and data-driven products.
Thanks, Martin. Nadeem.
Hi, so I'm Nadeem Gulzar, and just to give you a slight background, I have a background in finance, where I've been for many, many years. But recently I joined the Danish Ministry of Taxation. And in the Danish Ministry of Taxation, what we do is we want, on one hand, to utilize the data internally to optimize processes, make everything smoother, help our case officers, our investigation officers, etc., to basically minimize the case handling time. On the other hand, what we want to do is obviously help our citizens and corporates when they interact with us, whether it's through our numerous solutions or even just basically filing out different tax forms and tax returns, etc. One key example that I can give you where we actually utilize data heavily today is when a citizen actually needs to fill out their tax return form. And we actually go to great extent to make sure that it's pre-filled out with all the information that we already have. So things like how much you make, if you have a mortgage, all these kind of things we try to fill out in advance to make it as easy as possible. And if you are, sorry to say, quote unquote, a regular citizen, then you should probably not do much with that information. You don't need to fill out any additional thing. We try to aim for 85–90% of our what we call regular citizens with just a mortgage, a job, etc., etc. That 85–90% of those are actually pre-filled, and you don't need to do anything. So that's one of the key things that we do.
Thanks, Nadeem. Really interesting. Over to the Kees.
Yeah, so my name is Kees Klein. I'm an expert lead in data analytics in ING. And I'm basically involved in large programs related to data analytics. And there's two components to that. The first is regulatory driven. So running large programs like IBOR, GDPR, economic capital, and all of them actually have to do with making data available and providing information to a regulator. And the other is more business driven. And we look at improving data sharing, looking at procurement. Historically, ING has been quite a federated organization. So all our data is still in local systems. And what we do from a business side is we try to bring that together and really sort of unlock the value out of that data, both from a business perspective as well as from a regulatory perspective. And my background is actually in McKinsey in doing banking transformations, 7 years, and before that I was in the Marine Corps. So also a large part of my work is in the change component of actually getting value out of that data and making people change.
We should come back to the topic of digital marines later, Kees. A nice analogy, I think, to digital innovation inside large companies. Pieter.
Hi everyone, I'm Pieter. I'm the global product owner for data and analytics in a strategic partnership with AXA, where we're taking on the bank assurance industry across 6 markets where we are both companies at, and taking on a couple of the major insurtech competition, which are some smaller players with a competitive edge that we think we have in the customer data we have of our clients, making sure that when we engage a customer and ask them what type of insurances would fit their lifestyle, we at least have a prelude to that discussion that is sensible. And we do a bit more than that. We then go further to really personalize the whole experience, but also understanding that the right offer at the right price is presented. As Kees already mentioned, a lot of it is change in ING. So it's a big change and shift for ING to use global data on this scale. So it's exciting and challenging at the same time. GDPR, global platforms, as well as the actual edge of using data is all challenges that we deal with. Yeah, and it's exciting and difficult markets that we handle. One of it's being a very regulated market in Europe, and our German market. But it's yeah, it's a great and exciting project.
Thanks, Pieter. So now let's go to the more tough questions. So I'd like to start us off with asking the question, how is data put to work in your sector in general, and crucially, is it for the public good? And I throw that question first over to Martin.
So it's an interesting question. I think the real problem, I think, in terms of the sectors that we service, in the insurance sector, really comes from the legacy systems that a lot of insurance claims teams operate around. There has, over the last 20 years I've been in the insurance sector, servicing it, both working within it and then becoming a lawyer servicing that industry, what I've seen is organizations come together, a lot of rationalization in the market in terms of the number of insurers, but each and every insurer coming together, it comes together with a technical debt from its systems and its data capabilities, and joining those takes time. Claims, certain insurance claims can last in some instances many years, and as a consequence what happens is that joining these things together I think becomes really, really difficult, and that legacy is something that the insurance industry carries with it, and as such it takes time for real evolution to happen. I think evolution can start now to happen quicker because the ability around data engineering and the systems around this that can start to bring different data sets together, I think is accelerating. But I think in terms of whether the data is being used as well as it might do from a technical perspective, is a difficult thing. I think that's taking some time to come. And then on top of that, you then have this regulatory environment, which makes it even more difficult. So you have this technical piece of work that's been happening over the last 20 years, and then attacking that together at the same time has become this governance piece. And the 20 years in the UK, we had the Data Protection Act, which embedded the late 90s data regulation into the UK, and we're now embedding through the Data Protection Act to update in 2018. We're now embedding the GDPR into that, and we've been trying to solve the technical problems in and around that regulatory environment. I think there's a conversation to be had today. I believe will be interesting to look at that, the way in which we've approached the regulations as an industry, as both a technical data industry as well as the different industries that we sit within, and ask ourselves whether we've done enough to guide the thinking of the regulators around data, and have we done enough thought leadership in this space?
Really interesting point, Martin. I know that Kees is often also considering this question of regulation and data, and can regulations actually help innovation move forward in here? So I'll pass the question over to Kees on how is data put to work in banking, and is it for the public good?
Yeah, I think in ING and in banks in general, data has always been at the core of what we do. And when we make a risk decision, it's always driven based on data. And nowadays, with the rise of AI and AI, a lot more is possible. So we can do better risk assessments, the core of our banking. We can also look at offering better services and also adhere better to regulation. And if I look within ING, we actually have some values and some principles in place in how we handle data. For example, we always act in the best interest of the customer when we use data. Obviously, we also stick to regulation, but there's also things like that we are transparent on what we do with the data, so the public can always see for themselves what we do with their data, and can give us feedback on whether that is indeed as they intend us to use it.
That's very interesting. And Pieter, would you say that's consistent across the banking sector? You've also seen a lot of banking in Africa and variously spread around the world. So how is banking using data across these very different domains, and is it for the public good?
It is. I think if the use cases are aimed at direct value, which is always what requires the explanation from us as data experts. So as Kees mentioned, it's transparency and explaining that. Fine print is no longer accepted anymore. I think one needs to explain the benefits of sharing data or processing data to customers or potential customers willing to share their data. And I think indeed the ING has quite a proactive stance on this in terms of how we update our privacy statements, how we ask for consent, making it clear and explicit, but also selling the value of it, which is what we're doing together with AXA, and explaining clearly that a customer always has the option, and these are the benefits for us in terms of preparing a package or an offer for a customer if they do allow to share the data. I think, though, what is important is, to Martin's point, we can be a bit more proactive on stimulating and having discussions with the regulators as well. Because clearly some of the directives are explicit enough, some are a little bit more in the gray area, and that requires input back from the industry, I think.
And of course, Nadeem, you sit very close to the regulators over there in the public sector. In a way, the tax authority is kind of a regulator as well as a user of data. So over in the public sector, and specifically about taxation, is data being used for the public good?
To turn it around, a lot of citizens and also large corporates, they actually demand that we utilize data even further, because again, they are tired, just to be honest, I mean, they're tired of putting across the same information over and over and over again. So they want us, especially in taxation, to utilize the data and the information and the insight that we already have. Back to during the intro, I stated that, well, why not use the information we already have and put it across? If the citizen or the corporate disagrees with that information, they're openly able to change it. Another thing is, I completely agree with Peter, stating that gone are the days where you fill out manual forms, you put across documents and things like that. Unfortunately, there are some areas in taxation where that is still the case, unfortunately. But again, this is our aim to eliminate all those obstacles to make things smoother. We actually yesterday just launched an app. So when you want to change the ownership of a vehicle, it used to be a quite cumbersome process where you had to fill out different forms and put it across, and a lot of people need to look into it, et cetera, et cetera. So a process that can easily take days, if not weeks. Now you can actually do it, as one of our citizens said, well, you can do it in under 5 minutes, and that's actually including finding the app, downloading it, and then using it. So you can do it very, very fast. And that's just one example. And we want to do this across the board when you interact with us as a taxation office.
Rob, if I may just add on to what Nadeem said, I think one thing that triggered me is we talk about transparency in terms of data processing, but it's also transparency in terms of financial services products. So for instance, insurance is often quite complicated. One, as a policyholder, do not always know all the clauses and what one is covered for, and if it's even right for me, given my lifestyle situation, household, demographics, risk area, etc. And so I think that's a lot of good that can come from taking quite complicated or historically complicated financial services offerings and fit it way more to how a person is living or a household is living. So I think it goes both ways. It's not just the transparency in what data is used, but also the transparency data gives in terms of how a offer is formulated and presented to a customer.
And again, I mean, regardless of how we as regulators or you could say part of this ecosystem, regardless of how we feel, our customers or citizens and corporations, they are actually used to dealing with companies like Facebook, Google, eBay, all these kind of companies that really utilize the data and the information they have. Obviously, I know there's also a creepy element to it, and I'm not going there, but that is the expectation, and everyone wants us to use their data for the greater good. And obviously, we still need to adhere to all kinds of regulations, GDPR, etc. So it's not like we are misusing any information. But as soon as a citizen or someone else gives their opt-in, then we should use the data and the information that we have.
Very interesting. I mean, staying on the subject of regulators, so we're talking about, you know, optimizing our industries, so delivering better services and products. But for the people who watch that, the people who take care of that, who audit that, do you see a future where that role will also significantly change with the benefit of data and data applications? For example, automated auditing, if that's possible. I'd like to throw that over to Martin first.
I think that is interesting. I think that that whole conversation around transparency that Peter was referring to there, I think can go to that same piece, isn't it? It's about whether the products and the data that's driving those products can make the benefit of making complex things more simple, and ostensibly, is that also the area where data can be driven into that audit space? Is a great question. Just in terms of this piece around the regulatory environment as well, and it links again to something that Peter said before, and I think is really interesting, is that the pace in which technology is evolving. The GDPR process, in terms of deciding what the law should state, what the regulation should state, I mean, you will have all experienced that that kind of glacial speed at which that went through the European legislative process. And because you all work with technology, you could probably think back to how many new pieces of technology or innovation or change of approach were developed in the time it took for the European Union to actually create the drafting, for that to go through the process of then going into the local jurisdictions. And if I think about the way in which the GDPR was brought into the UK, it all happened then in a hurry, with people basically scrambling to make sure that things could happen in their jurisdictions that they were already doing. Nobody was giving sufficient thought to actually what are we going to want to be doing for the next 5 years. And so we're now sat here trying to innovate with data based on legislation that allows us to do things that we were doing 5 years ago, but we've got no interest in continuing to do next. And I think that's part of this whole process. It's around this can we keep the regulators and can we keep the regulation up to date with the technology, and do the technologists simply keep outrunning the regulators? And it's a real challenging area, because it is then the regulators that drive the thinking around the governance frameworks that we all sit within, that then slow us down in terms of the technology. So we sit here as a group of technologists going, we want to be over here. Our governance piece are going, well, hang on a sec, but you can only be here where we are right now. And I go back to, again, that thought leadership piece. What we're trying to do at Kennedy's is build the thought leadership element into our innovation space. You know, we as a law firm are thinking about the future risks of our customers. And actually, I think this is a big area of that future risk. And I think it just loops back into the governance piece, you know, in terms of what are the future risks that we need to mitigate for. It's the barriers that are in our way, both real and perceived, that are in our way now, but what are they going to be in the future as well? So I probably answered a different question there, Rob, but I think
it's great. I think also I reckon Kees has some comments on this too, because what you've been talking about is really a people and change situation, not just within our own industries, but within the watchmen of those.
And with
those industries
as well.
Exactly. And so Kees, what do you see from the future of how the regulator might interact with us?
Yeah, I think it's a fair point that the regulation is to an extent a bit behind what is currently possible. On the other hand, you do see that actually there's innovation coming from that as well. So if we look at sort of the GDPR regulation, actually the concept of what is personal is, for example, quite broad. So we need to really sort of do a lot of work in order to depersonalize the data. But what you now see is there's new sort of fintechs and other parties standing up that offer these type of services, such as pseudonymization or better encryption, better data lineage, so that we can actually do more with the data while still adhering to the regulation. I think one thing that is particularly difficult for us as being a global bank is that the actual oversight on GDPR is done by local regulators, and that sometimes gives different type of implementation interpretations. Let alone if you go beyond sort of the European Union, where if we, for example, exchange data with the US companies with the new service regulation, that is also becoming more difficult. And so I think there's also a need to not only think of this from a European perspective, but really think of this from a global perspective, because that's also how we as a bank, but also these fintechs and big techs operate.
Thanks, Kees. And Nadeem, do you see the regulators changing anytime soon? Are we going to be done with the auditors and instead install an audit program in 5 minutes from the App Store? How's that going to look?
If only I could share some of the insight from my meetings with the Justice Department, but unfortunately I'm unable to. But I completely agree with with Kees and with Martin as well. And Martin actually made a very, very good point. The regulators are slightly lagging behind, but I think it's also our duty as being part of, you could say, the technology group to help them, assist them in bridging that gap that we have today. And I actually remember one of my good friends, a CDO, he said, well, look at the GDPR. What did that really bring? And I know it's a topic in its own, but what his point of view was, well, basically, when you visit sites, it gives you cookies and a lot of pop-ups where you need to accept and so on. And that's where it has gotten us right now. But obviously, over time, it will stabilize and it will find its place. And it is a good thing per se. So it is good that we have regulation in place, because otherwise you could do all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, it's our job as well to bridge that gap. That's at least my point of view. And we do quite a bit in order to help, you could say, regulators understand the needs and why the needs do not break the regulations that are in place. And I think it's, what I feel is it's also, people are a bit scared, to be honest, in the sense that if I say, yes, go ahead, do that, if I approve that, what does that mean? And especially in the public sector, I mean, does that mean, do I get a PR case in 2 years' time on my neck, or what happens? So there's also people being scared. So there's a fear in this community as well. And but this is also due to the gap, at least from my point of view.
We've heard that comment also in the healthcare sector, Nadeem, last time. It seems like you're not alone. Before we move on to the subject of healthcare, we have a question from the chat. Do we think, staying on the subject of regulation, can customer approval, can active opt-in in some way circumvent regulations? Is it a way to do things that we're not supposed to do? Let's ask Kees.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think. To a certain extent it can, but actually as ING we try to prevent opt-in, because opt-in can also mean opt-out. Or customers can opt out later again. So if we do something based on customer consent, then we always need to think about what will happen if that consent is withdrawn. So in that sense, we always try to look for other sort of reasons for using the customer data, such as a legitimate interest, to use the data. So So I would say we would actually try to prevent that.
Just to add to that, Kees, I think I think what opt-in does with the necessity to maintain your current sort of status of opt-in, opt-out. What you do is create a kind of regulatory debt in similar to a technical debt, which kind of needs to be constantly sort of worked around. And you made the point before about innovation, for example, around cleansing tools or things like that. We've been working around that as well with some of our projects that Rob and the team at Leap Beyond will know about. And I think that does create that innovation in order to solve that problem of what the regulatory and governance framework allows us to do. The best way of solving the data protection issues around personally identifiable information is to simply remove the personal information from it, because then it doesn't have any data protection issues from a contingent within it, and therefore those regulations don't apply. So I think that's an interesting area. And again, Nadeem also mentioned as well around the what does GDPR give us? It gives us the frustration of every website we visit to tell us to what's our cookie acceptance status, for instance. And it's just from a consumer, it's just frustrating. It really is frustrating. But actually, everyone's running scared because there's a fear of handling this personal information incorrectly amongst all those those commercial businesses. So how's that solved? Is that another area where either we inform and change the regulations, or do we, as you said, Keith, do we innovate around that by finding new ways to help people sort of set what their acceptable level of cookie status is for all websites, and gives them a tool that controls all of their cookie acceptances. So do we change the burden? I don't know.
It's a good point, Martin. And I think also from a customer perspective, often what you see in these websites, if you don't accept the cookie, you cannot even enter the website. So, and it's the same, I think, with a lot of the big techs. If you don't accept their terms and conditions, then you cannot open a Facebook account, or you cannot get a Google account. So, to a certain extent, maybe customers also feel they're forced into it. So, we need to think very carefully when we use these sort of tools to get customer consent. If there's also other means available to us, like pseudonymization.
If you're forced into it, then is consent really consent? It's we're in a rabbit hole.
Very interesting. So we talked a bit about regulators there, and I want to move a little bit onto that subject of healthcare. So from our impressions from the healthcare session last time, the regulators in healthcare are really pushing for innovation. They're trying to get healthcare providers to innovate more. Is it the same in your sector? Do you feel like the regulators are actively asking you to innovate, or do you feel like they're somehow stopping you from innovating? Let's pose that question first to Pieter.
I wouldn't say they're proactively engaging on how to innovate using data. They're trying to fill all the holes and all the answers, all the questions that may arise at this stage. So an example of that is in the directives is on data minimization. There's a lot of questions from technologists on building global platforms on exactly what the concrete guidelines are for minimizing data and moving data, and differentiating between the processing of personal data versus storing it or aggregating it. So I would say still a lot of work to be done to make the regulation more clear and more practical before we get to the phase of proactively engaging on how to use, specifically in financial services. I think the regulator is well aware that banks and insurers are using data to innovate. So it's really to make sure that any gray areas are covered, is my opinion. But that's perhaps different in different sectors.
And in legal tech, then, Martin, we've seen a lot of startups appear and very quickly disappear in the legal tech space. What's the role of the regulator there? Are they fostering innovation? Are they preventing it? What's going on?
Yeah, I think that's very difficult. I think what I can relay to kind of the nature of a conversation I had with a client this week. They're a big multinational insurance company, and they set about a digital transformation strategy 5 years ago, and it was all IT focused, and they started building their systems and everything else, and then the data analytics function grew, and then that data analytics function said, "What are you doing over there?" And then they said, "How are you doing that, and why are you doing it?" And all of a sudden what they realized was that all of the governance framework around what they needed to have in place wasn't there necessarily, that was going to allow them to do any of the analytics that would come off the back of the benefit of their IT strategy around their systems use. So they had to run hard and fast, and what they did in running hard and fast was spend a lot of time thinking about their governance framework, putting that in place first, and then catching up and overtaking that IT project that allowed them to become, as they described it, this speedboat that went ahead of the tanker. Now, rolling that example back into, that's a big organization that have, all the right people in place internally, from GCs and data protection teams and all the rest of it. A startup doesn't necessarily have that. And I think that they can run after solving the problem before they've worked out what the rules of the game need to be. And in doing that, what they end up doing, to my mind, is creating for themselves that, and I made the reference before, they create for themselves this kind of technical debt from like a regulatory debt that I think can swallow them up. And they can demonstrate some fantastic capability in technology, but have no means of which to turn that into anything that can be useful commercially, because they have not addressed the regulatory needs. So they end up being swallowed into either dying on the vine or being swallowed into another organization if they're lucky. And as such, I think the regulators then need to step back and go, well, what do we want to foster here? And I look at where the UK is going, because that's where I'm sat. And at the moment, we are in the midst of considering the UK National Data Strategy consultation paper. And this is an area that I think the UK government are going to start to really think about, which is not common of the last 5 years or so around the UK government, of them thinking around policy before implementing it. But I think what we're going to end up in now is this place where they're going to give some thought as to what they want the digital innovation and the data innovation environment to be, and what does the regulatory framework need to be around that. And I think at Kennedy's, we're going to do some thought leadership in this space, and we're going to approach that consultation and respond to it, because we think that this is an important area. What does that data consultation need? Sorry, what does that data environment and regulatory environment need to be to allow innovation to thrive and these startups to become successful? And I think that is going to be something that the UK government is interested in. And I think that they look at their COVID experience and they see what was necessary in order to respond to COVID was a kind of a softening of some of the regulatory environment, and particularly in the healthcare sector, around how data was going to be used. And they realise actually they might need to do that in relation to other innovation as well. Where that leaves us in terms of how we will then sort of fit with a jigsaw piece towards GDPR and the ability for us to continue migrating data across borders with the European Union is another question. I think that's something that needs to be figured out as well as part of this consultation.
That's really interesting, Martin. Thanks. And Nadeem, I think a lot of companies look towards the Nordics and the integrated systems. The Estonian model of healthcare. Denmark has a single citizen number for everyone that exists in every system. Is it also the regulators and yourself as regulators? Is it pushing towards more of that direction? Are the regulators involved in innovation? Or what else is the magic that goes on in the Nordics that we don't seem to have captured in the UK and elsewhere in Europe?
Obviously, as you mentioned, I mean, having single data sources or single versions of the truth really, really helps. And I mean, the social registry is really a good source, and it also helped quite a bit during COVID. Because the government actually created an app which was pretty much downloaded by every citizen in Denmark, in order to help us contain this virus. And it was an opt-in model that was chosen. I think that was the best fit, at least for now. What it allowed us to do was to track individuals, but not in a sense that you could identify the individual per se. It was only if a citizen got infected that you would then say, okay, now I would like to share my information so we can stop this and hopefully contain this to the best of our abilities. And that model is actually quite good because you keep your PII information until the very last minute, and the only one you're sharing it to is the government, which actually already have the information. So that was a good model, and that is one thing that actually helped us quite a bit. Another thing is, I mean, having an overview of people's salaries, their loans, etc. It helps our, you could say, finance area and the banks in Denmark quite a bit. Obviously, I've been talking about this for quite some time, and other countries feel that, whoa, that is maybe just one step too much. But it actually helps us quite a bit, and all that information, having that in a central place, allows us now, or our banks, to offer, as an example, a mortgage. So you can apply for a mortgage online. You don't even need to go anywhere. You don't need to visit a bank or anything like that, because all the information is readily available. You just need to give your consent, and then everything is processed for you. So basically, you can sit home, you can look online for different properties, houses, etc. And when you choose one, you can buy it just like you buy any other commodity online. And that is the power of sharing data, having central registers, etc. Obviously, you also need to look at it from a security perspective and a legal perspective, but a lot of work is being done in that as well. Obviously, to make sure that data is not leaked out to unknown parties and things like that. And at least what I haven't heard any other view from citizens and corporations within Denmark and within the Nordics that have complained about having such a system in place, because yes, it's a lot of information stored centrally, but just look at the convenience. I mean, I've bought property abroad as well, and if I compare it to the model in the Nordics, it's night and day. It's really night and day. I mean, you need to go through lots of legislation. You fill out hundreds of forms and whatnot. And here, and I don't even kid. I mean, you just hit go and sign digitally, and you got it, and that's it. You don't need to do anything more, and that's the power of it.
I mean, it's amazing, and what I really want to see. I mean, personally, I'm getting very passionate about data in healthcare and using data more in healthcare, and I want to see these types of things exist also across in healthcare. And from our last session, healthcare as a sector, it just seems decades behind, maybe 20 years behind where we are in banking and in retail. So as I spin that question over a little bit towards Pieter, I'm asking the question, well, healthcare as a sector seems decades behind other highly regulated sectors. What message would you like to give to major influencers or healthcare professionals on working with sensitive data and how to unlock that potential for the future, Pieter?
It's always nice to comment when you're not sitting in the sector, but I mean, clearly it can save lives and help people to really help people to a tremendous level. Time in health is also a thing. Time to cure, time to diagnose, and so the impact is maybe not understood by practitioners. Perhaps also. It's such an established academical field that to change that from a knowledge perspective in terms of how you apply deep technical medical knowledge is not easy to change because it's so embedded in a select few of expert medical practitioners. So I would say data awareness, concretely explain the benefits of data to and abstract it a bit to simple examples to the experts. I would say not the ones setting up the processes, because they're probably seeing the pain, and they're seeing the pain of hospitals and processes, you know, needing more and more automation. But it's really about the doctors, the surgeons, starting there, and some data awareness training would really be interesting, I would think.
There must be some way to reduce the that atmosphere of fear, right? Fear about using those new technologies and using that data. Almost everything that you're working on, Pete, almost everything that Kees is working on, almost everything that Martin's working on, almost everything that Nadeem's working on has an analogy in healthcare. There is some part of that which works very similar to that, has almost the same flow diagram. Why isn't that also automated? Why isn't that also digitized? So Nadeem, you work again in a culture which is slightly less fearful, perhaps of use of data. Tell us how can we reduce that fear factor in healthcare?
I actually agree with Peter. I mean, data awareness or data literacy is the first step in this direction. I mean, basically just registering all the information that we have available, and it can be anything. I mean, it can be medical journals, it can be CT scans, it can be all kinds of documentation and data. I'm actually heavily inspired by the Estonia model. I think, Rob, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, I visited the government, and they kind of showed everything that they have in place, and it's quite amazing that you with a very simple ID, which contains everything. By the way, it's your social. You could say card. It's your medical card. It's your driving license. It's everything in one ID. And with the same ID, you're able to log into the government systems and get access to all the information that you have, all the medical data. The woman that showed us and demonstrated the system actually logged into her own account and showed us, she went through an operation, etc., and showed us all the information. And she could actually choose, okay, what type of the data or what of the journals and the information available do I want to mark private, so no other doctors are actually able to see that. But at the same time, are there some things, maybe a procedure that I would like a second opinion on? So you're able through that system actually to do these kind of things. And that's actually a very, very good step. And if we could start by doing, I mean, introducing a data literacy, introduce the awareness amongst doctors, surgeons, et cetera, and start collecting that information so it's readily available across the different medical practices. That's step one. And step two, then start looking into, okay, making sure that that data is owned by none other than the patient that's actually in the center of this. And allowing that patient, that individual to approve whether this is the information I would like to share with you as my doctor, or do I want to get second opinion, all these kind of things. That, I think, is the initial steps that we need to take.
I mean, I'd really love to see that. And talking about data literacy and upskilling and general knowledge sharing amongst this, that's a topic that Kees and I have been discussing for a while now. It's still very necessary, even inside a big international bank, to do this kind of training. Kees, tell us what do you think that looks like in healthcare? What can we do there?
I fully agree with also what Peter said. I start with data awareness, and I think My wife is actually a doctor, and it's indeed quite a traditional sector. So I think it starts with education of the young doctors as well, and looking at training them how to use data, but also accepting that there's certain things that AI and AA might be able to do better. For example, checking breast scans for breast cancer. These type of things we already know that there's AI algorithms that can do this better than a human doctor. So I think then you also need to think about what does my role then become as a doctor, and you can focus more on the personal and the patient interaction side of things, which will be much more difficult to take over with things like algorithms and AI. So for me, it starts with really the education of the doctors.
That's really interesting. And then passing it over to Martin a little bit about I mean, what I think of when you're talking about cancer, when you're talking about viruses, is almost like it's so analogous, Martin. I mean, so analogous to fighting fraud. It really is. I mean, discovering this one needle in a haystack, a thing that's a thing that sticks out from the rest, that particular virus trying to get into the cells versus a particular person trying to get into your bank account. I mean, it seems almost identical. And across in AI and machine learning, then AI and machine learning have been shown time and time again now to outperform people when it comes to fraud. So why not outperform people when it comes to diagnosing cancer? And Martin, I know that you're very interested in the fraud area. Tell us about that.
I think I'll answer that question on why do we go to see a doctor, and what's our expectation when we go to the doctors. I think at the heart of that relationship is trust. Okay, and you're going to trust what your doctor tells you. You know, you don't know why you're going to do it, but I think society has built up, and in many respects has been proven to why we build up that confidence in our doctors, and that's why we listen to them and follow what they say. Passing that trust over to an algorithm, passing that trust over to data and AI is going to take some time. And I think Kennedy's explored this whole trust issue in our work that we did around autonomous vehicles, and we've published a whole report on societal acceptance in different parts of the world around autonomous vehicles being on the road. So I think trust is at the heart of it, and I think data is it's no different to romantic relationships. You know, it's in the romantic relationships we find that it's very hard to build trust, but very, very easy to lose it. And so when you have it, you've got to guard it and guard it carefully. And I thought about that as I was listening to Nadeem speak. I thought that was really important when he was talking about the centralisation at government level of personal information. And I thought back to the UK and thought, well, a decade ago or more than a decade ago, we were talking about and trying to get national ID cards in play in the UK. It didn't happen. The UK public did not have the trust in UK government for that. And we saw this come through in COVID. You know, at the beginning of the crisis in the UK, the behavioural scientists advising government were telling government that the UK public will not accept being locked down for long. You know, we would rebel against that in some way, shape or form. This is what the informed wisdom was telling government. And Boris Johnson articulated that in that the UK were a freedom-loving country or some nonsense. But the point being is that was the perception. However, when it came to lockdown, the UK bought in. We understood why we were doing it. We trusted that it was the right thing to do, and we locked down for 12 weeks. When did that trust dissipate? As soon as Dominic Cummings went to Barnard Castle. I don't know if you followed this story in the UK, but a senior government advisor, he broke the lockdown rules, and the stories around his reason for breaking those rules were frankly nonsense. And as a consequence, the UK has lost trust. And through the summer, what we have is had varying degrees of societal acceptance of lockdown, of national restrictions around COVID. And I think that is the example of where something was asked of us, we trusted in it, and now society has lost its trust, and we wonder what the next steps will be. I think data has to think about that and think really carefully as an industry. When you build that trust, it's going to take time to do it. When you've built it, never let it go. I think that's an important message. When it comes down to that you asked me about fraud, Rob, and I can talk to the same being the case in our fraud algorithms and our fraud systems that we have deployed. One of the things that's always said to me is, well, what about the false positive rates? And it comes down to trust. Are you going to trust the output? I can show machine learning that shows how our false positive rates decrease and our accuracy increases with a model around feedback based on machine learning techniques. That's brilliant, and that helps build trust. And when we build that trust, then the client starts to rely on the output more and more. But for me, it goes all the way back to trust again.
Thanks, Martin. I see Peter reaching for the mic. Go ahead, Peter.
A quick comment. It's interesting as you were saying that, Martin, because it reminds me of the days that simple reporting, when that was automated by machines, were not trusted by people traditionally using spreadsheets. And why there was a multitude of reasons. One was vigorous testing and time that it took. And the other one is what is expected of the information. Is it an absolute, definitive, 100% truth? Or is it indicative of value? And so it's really important to also understand how we communicate what a machine learning model is predicting and what that information is. Is it 100% accurate, even if it's retrained truth, or is it a statistical number? And people are traditionally bad with understanding statistics. There was a book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, on this a bit. It's not intuitive for us to understand statistics.
And it goes back to the data literacy points that have been made by Nadeem and Kees as well. It's so important, I think, for that data literacy to come. And I had just another example around that trust issue just really dropped into my mind because it links back to the regulation. So if you think about the first data protection regulations or the data directives that existed in the EU, how they were applied nationally was different. And you could almost match it to the World War II experiences of that population. Okay, you looked at the US and you saw this sort of data freedom, complete data freedom. Now in the US, you've got the California Consumer Privacy Act coming out, and that feels to me to be a direct response to the loss of trust following the activities of Silicon Valley companies. The involvement of Facebook in the last 5 years of worldwide elections and people using that data for different purposes. And I just think that is, you have an action, and to every action you have a reaction. And I just think that that's exactly where we are again. Those big tech companies are starting to bleed the trust of those users and society generally. And as a consequence, regulation will follow and try and stem that tide. And in doing so, will probably overreact as a consequence.
Thanks very much, Martin. So we're coming up to the end of our time, but I want to end on a high note. I want to end on a future inspiration. So if everyone could say just quite quickly a little bit of their vision about where this is CDO Seminars 2020. If we were doing this again in 2040, what would you like to be seeing then? What will be possible then as the regulators catch up and as health gets better? So I'm just going to go across the panel from one side to the other. Kees, where will we be in 2040?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to really look that far ahead, but I see a lot of opportunities for using data in all sorts of ways we probably couldn't have imagined. And I was very inspired by the example mentioned also by Nadeem on the Estonian government and how they have done it. So I hope we will, as a society, move towards some of these possibilities. And from a regulatory perspective, I hope we get more towards a level playing field. What you now see with GDPR is actually a bit more of the exception, that it is for all companies. But we as a bank run about 40 large programs now to implement regulation. PSD2 is one example where it only applies to bank and not to big tech. What I think we need to realize is that banks as well as big tech and a lot of other companies all operate with data and need to have a more level playing field between them. So that's my hope from a regulatory perspective.
Thanks very much, Kees. Really awesome. We're really short on time, so really quickly, Nadeem, what's your vision for 2040?
I think seamless use of data for everyone, obviously fully regulated, but I think the seamless use of data across all the industries and providing the best solutions for our end customers, I think that is the key, and basically minimizing all the time that we today spend interacting with corporations, etc. I think minimizing that to absolutely nothing. I think that is kind of the key here.
Awesome. That gave me chills. Chills when you say that, Nadeem. That sounds really great. Martin.
For me, I think we need to get to our kids. We need to get to the next generation. So I would like to see data statistics, the technologies much more embedded in the national curriculums around Europe.
Oh, wow, excellent. Yeah, the children of the future, as they say, right? Pieter.
I'll add on to Martin. Organizing information, our kids are thrown with apps and links, and we all have a bit of a foundation of organizing information or classifying it. So I hope we have significant technologies with classifying information and making it easy to access, not just everywhere.
Thanks, Pieter, and thanks again, everyone. So, everybody, looks like we've exhausted our time for the day. Sorry, we ran a minute or two over. I'd like to close by thanking our panelists for giving their time and open insight to this complex and inspiring topic. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this opportunity today. Thanks also to our associates in organising this series, Infomet, MACT, and Altviz. Next time we meet, it'll be to discuss how the disruptive world of 2020 is variously pushing companies to digitize more and separately providing a big barrier to digitization as a flip side to the same coin. In our third installment, robust data applications for uncertain times. What techniques and approaches there can also carry over to healthcare. Follow us on LinkedIn to get the memo when the new sign-up link is issued. And I look forward to you joining us with a new expert panel at some point later in the month for this next installment. Finally, thanks to the audience for joining us today. I hope this has inspired you to ask bigger questions and work towards the beautiful future. Hope to see you all again next time. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.